He's back. Now in this season, I expected to follow Joe throughout Paris as he hunts for Marianne, not Joe in London solving a murder mystery. This season threw me for a loop. But guys, before I dive in the video, I want you guys to list who you thought the killer was before the reveal at the end. I want to know if you guessed it right or if you didn't, because I'm going to tell you now, I had 3 guesses. I thought it was either Kate, Sophie, or Nadia for different reasons. But before we dive into why I thought it was them, let's talk about this new season. This season does something different than the previous seasons of You. This season actually gives Joe someone to go against. Someone who's just as smart as Joe. Someone who's always one step ahead of him. And I've never seen Joe with his back against the wall like this. And it was refreshing. For this to be the final season of You and for them to give Joe such a worthy opponent, I have to give it up to them. They really stepped up to the plate this final season. But now, let's dive into what happened. Joe ends up in London. He's now a professor named Jonathan Moore and he's teaching at a college. And we know what Joe does best. He integrates into the society. He finds rich people that he ingratiates himself with, even though Joe likes to be a self-proclaimed proletariat and he's for the people. And this season kind of dives into that with the Eat the Rich, Murder the Rich campaign. And this entire season, or You as a whole, has always also been a lot about social commentary in the modern era, and it's always tackling subjects from a left-leaning political spectrum, so we always knew that going in when it came to You. And this season's no different, and it kind of upplays Joe's part of it. Joe is always repulsed by the rich, but his friends are always rich. Joe always has a ton of money, and he's always hanging out with them. Like, for a guy who don't like rich people, like, all your friends are always rich. Even though you hate them, you always hang out with them, you sleep with them, and all that happens within that circle. So this season has us looking at Joe from that lens of him standing out from the rich yet again. But now we have these rich people who are by far the worst of all the You characters we ever had. And we had some pretty fucked up individuals when it came to You. We had some pretty fucked up individuals abusing their power and their money. But these guys take the cake. It's insane. Which leads us to the murder of Malcolm. So far, Joe's been living his life, doing his thing. Now Malcolm's dead. Now Joe finds his body in his house. Joe gets rid of the body because someone's clearly trying to frame Joe. And Joe, being who he is, that person underestimated him. And now we have a cat and mouse game. The person knows who Joe is, but Joe doesn't know. The person kills again. And now it becomes public. There's a serial killer. Joe is not the killer for the first time. And for the first time in a season, Joe is not the one who's doing it. He's not doing behind any of it. That's crazy. This season leads heavy into the murder mystery trope that's been seeing a renaissance lately when it comes to movies. There was Death on the Nile and both Glass Onion movies, and we see this style of movie coming back. And now that genre permeated its way to this show. And what makes this similar to them is we have all these larger-than-life characters when it comes to murder mysteries. Nadia explains it best. It's not about the mystery itself, because every murder TV show, movie, whatever, has someone who killed somebody. Somebody did it. It's not about who did it. It's more about the person trying to figure out who did it. There's always some weird thing about them. Look at Glaves out. Benoit Blanc is just freakishly smart. So is Hercule Poirot, but they also have their weird quirks about them. So now you have the legends such as Hercule Poirot, Benoit Blanc, and now we have to throw Joe Goldberg in there because he's hunting this. And Joe also has a curious strength. Joe is a sociopathic serial killer, and he is looking for a sociopathic serial killer. So that's the angle that's really tackled this season. And we see Joe really go against somebody who's smarter than him. Joe's always been composed. Joe's always been one step ahead of anybody. Even when it came to love, knowing who he was and his secrets, he was always one step ahead of her. But in this scenario, Joe is in a new country. Joe stands out. Joe has no money compared to these people. And it's a predicament where he doesn't know who to trust. So he's now trying to figure out who done it. And the show does a great job of littering all these potentials. Now, I told you guys my 3. I thought it was either Nadia, Sophie, or Kate. Let me get the easiest one out the way first. Let's talk about Sophie. I thought it was Sophie because that night they all met Joe. Joe got drunk and he said something to her. She instantly loved him, took him under her wing, and from that moment on, Joe's been the golden boy. However, we don't really see her interact with the other people like that. We don't really see her doing anything, but these murders keep happening, and all we know is she's talking highly of Joe, and we know she's a person of means, and she's also best friends with Kate. So I could see her having to create this social media facade and her cracking under that pressure, as well as her best friend being taken advantage of by these 2 D-bags. So I could see her doing that and killing her. So I thought it was her, especially after she had her security guard following Joe around. So I thought it was her, but quickly we find out it's not. And then I thought it was Kate. Kate was, I feel like, the obvious choice because, like, Kate doesn't flinch. She doesn't budge. She doesn't cry. Every time something happens to her or something involving Kate and a scene with Kate, the killer texts Joe not too far often. So a lot of things were pointing to her, and she got rid of Malcolm. She probably was bitter and hurt over all his cheating. She found out about Simon, and shortly after that, Simon died, which is another indicator it might have been Kate. And even when her and Joe have intimate moments, the killer knew about it. So I thought it was Kate just messing with Joe ultimately. But then it wasn't Kate. Or was it? Because the jury's still out on that. Now, the person who I really thought did it was Nadia. And I thought she was playing some 4D level chess trying to destroy the rich. Because she talks to Joe about Agatha Christie, the novels, and she's explaining to Joe, she's almost spoon feeding him information on how to catch her. That's what I was thinking. And the fact that she had the affair with Malcolm and her name could be ruined, and the rich are known for blackmailing each other, because this whole friend circle are terrible human beings. Even though they all have known each other for years, they're horrible to each other. So I thought someone knew about the tryst and they went to blackmail her and Malcolm about it, and she took care of it because she got jealous. I had this whole scheme, and especially after there was an exchange in episode 3, I believe it was, yes, when she went to Joe's apartment and they talked right after Joe threw out the bait and wanted the killer to initiate a meeting. She came in right after, and I was like, ooh, foreshadowing. That's me looking at all the clues. This show, this season specifically, will have you do that. You're going to be putting pieces together, and ultimately, all of them have the motive, they have the reason, and they all could have been logically the killer, and it works for all scenarios. But again, another spoiler warning, you have been warned. It being Rhys, I'm not surprised. Rhys is just another Joe. He comes from the same shitty upbringing. He hates the rich, but somehow he made it into their circle and he still hates them just like Joe. However, Rhys has the means. Rhys is Joe from the other side. What happens if Joe embraced the darkness? Because Joe has always been in denial about who he is, the monster inside. And Joe loves this shit. Don't let him fool you. Killing people, hunting them down, stalking, those things get Joe going. So now Joe has to fight another version of himself. Joe has to go against someone who's just as smart but has more resources, and now the ball is in Joe's court. Rhys has thought so far ahead that he's let Joe go. Joe knows who he is. He's in the public eye. Joe has all the ammunition. So it's like two people holding a nuclear weapon at each other, a Cold War, kind of like the US and Russia staring each other down. Who's gonna budge first? This is the final season of You, so Joe might not win, but Joe always seems to win. Do you think Joe survives this season once the second part comes out? I want to know your thoughts about it, because Joe's a terrible guy. He can't win, but for some reason, I can always see Joe winning. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and until next time, binge on.